My opponent's burden relies heavily upon the giving and receiving of consent. However, labors not in the duty of distinguishing the meanings or even the real existence of such consent. Under a hard or materialistic determinism perspective, real objective consent, which is contingent from the existence of free will, is not logically possible. While I recognize that he himself is not a hard determinist, that alone is not sufficient to absolve his hypothesis of that line of criticism. Nevertheless, even if consent can be proven to exist, that does not simultaneously grant that any imposition against that consent is universally and exclusively immoral. The initial condition in which it fails is not ascertaining the degree of consent necessary to absolve an imposition of being involuntary. The dictionary defines consent as permission for something to happen, agreement to join in a mutual act. Organizations intimate the diverse applications of this definition, such as Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, the U.S. Attorney General, and the UN Human Rights Council, recognize 4 distinct categories of consent, varying in severity, reasonable attainability, reasonable perceptibility, and legal applicability. Number 1 is implied consent, inference from nonverbal acts and or circumstances. Number 2 is expressed consent, clear and unmistakable consent given in writing or speech. Number 3 is informed consent, clarified appreciation of and comprehension of circumstantial facts. Number 4 is unanimous consent, collective agreement by a diverse body constituted by form of election. My opponent has stated in past debates his own personalized definition of consent, which as follows: preference is tantamount to consent, clarifying and cementing his intent with this definition with an ice cream metaphor. This notable absence of this definition from the list above aside, this ad hoc definition hosts a chorus of other significant problems, none the least of which is that it categorically preference is not tantamount to consent. One possible path out of this conundrum he may pursue is in his previously stated belief that technology will eventually eclipse culturally contingent beliefs, or that as technology improves, culturally contingent beliefs will eventually die off, relegating to the doom pile the aforementioned categories of consent. However, even if we intellectually grant that assumption, how can consent exist in the abstract without these or similar pragmatic categories? Additionally, even if we grant that our currently culturally contingent beliefs and or values regarding consent do die off as he prophesies, the result will not be a utopic cultural vacuum devoid of culturally contingent beliefs. Instead, it would simply be a new culture with its own culturally contingent beliefs flowing out of it. The final matter regarding consent, in which my opponent fails to ascertain his burden of proof, is in the not effectively distinguishing active imposition from passive imposition. Under his stated view, non-persons and impersonal forces, such as a rock, a train, or even gravity, not only can be, but objectively are, and exclusively immoral when acting against a person's will. Benign inconveniences, such as a line at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, would be categorized as immoral, despite evident logic to the contrary, as well as benevolent actions such as forcing an anorexic model to eat, or pushing a child out of the path of a moving vehicle and installing a fence that would prevent a wandering child from wandering out into traffic in the first place, would also be considered immoral under his view.